It was just another ordinary day when Elon Musk, sitting in his private office at SpaceX, received an unexpected call. The number wasn't one he recognized, and yet something told him this wasn't going to be just another random sales pitch or spam call. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but with a tone that hinted at urgency. "Elon Musk?" the voice asked. "That's me," Elon replied, leaning back in his chair, curiosity piqued. "This is Special Agent John Mason with the FBI. I need to meet with you, immediately," the voice said, its gravity sending a chill down Elon's spine. "It's urgent." Elon paused for a moment. The last time an FBI agent had contacted him, it was to talk about the potential security risks of one of his many projects. But this felt different. "I'm listening," Elon said, keeping his tone measured. "There are some things you don't know about the work you're doing, about certain people you've been working with," Agent Mason continued. "Meet me at a secure location. I'll explain everything." The call ended abruptly, leaving Elon with more questions than answers. Who could want to speak with him like this? And why now? What had he missed? He didn't waste time wondering. Further, within minutes he instructed his security team to prepare for an unplanned trip. The location Agent Mason had given him was outside of town, a remote area near a nondescript building. It all felt too secretive, too strange. By the time Elon arrived, the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the deserted landscape. His mind raced with possibilities. Had he unwittingly crossed some line with one of his projects? Or was this something far more sinister? The building where the meeting was set to take place looked like something from a spy movie, an unmarked industrial structure that could have been mistaken for a warehouse with no distinguishing features to set it apart from the countless others in the area. As he stepped out of the car, the air felt unusually heavy, thick with tension. Elon was escorted inside by a group of serious-looking agents, each of them carrying the weight of a secret that only they were allowed to know. The room where they met was dimly lit, filled with shadows and silence. And then across from him, sitting at a table with a file in front of him, was Agent Mason. "Mr. Musk," Mason greeted, his tone cold yet respectful. "I trust you're wondering why you're here." Elon didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I am. What's this all about?" Mason leaned forward slightly, his fingers steepling as he looked Elon directly in the eyes. "We've been monitoring a situation that involves your companies. Your projects have attracted more attention than you realize, and some of that attention is not the kind we can ignore." Elon's heart skipped a beat. Was this some kind of threat? He had dealt with all kinds of criticism in the past, but this felt different. The FBI didn't get involved in corporate squabbles. "You're involved in something much bigger than you know," Mason continued, his voice now laced with an intensity Elon had never heard before. "And if we don't act fast, it could change everything. Not just for you, but for the future of humanity, the two." Words hung in the air like a storm cloud, too heavy to ignore. Elon's mind spun. What was going on? What had he missed? And more importantly, what kind of impact was this going to have on the world he was working so hard to build? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon's mind was racing, trying to piece together what Agent Mason had just told him. He had built empires in aerospace, energy, and even electric cars, but none of his achievements had ever attracted this kind of attention, or this kind of secrecy. Mason slid a manila folder across the table toward Elon, its edges worn and frayed, as though it had been handled many times before. Elon hesitated for a moment before flipping it open. Inside were detailed reports, photographs, and data that made his stomach churn. "Some of this," Mason said, his voice low and steady, "you've been part of without realizing it. Other parts, well, let's just say they might come as a surprise." Elon's eyes scanned the papers, his pulse quickening as he read. There were references to advanced AI algorithms, secretive research facilities, and something even more troubling, a network of private investors and shadow organizations involved in manipulating the future of technology. His gaze lingered on a series of cryptic diagrams. They seemed familiar, yet there was something off about them, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. These weren't just any blueprints. These were designs for technologies far beyond what he had publicly unveiled. "What is this?" Elon asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "I don't understand. These are my projects, but they've been modified." "Not modified," Mason interrupted, his eyes narrowing. "Hijacked by people who have a much larger agenda than you ever imagined. You're being used, Musk. And the technology you've developed, it's being repurposed for purposes far darker than you could ever fathom." Elon shook his head, his thoughts a whirlwind. The idea that he, a man who prided himself on his visionary ideas, could be a pawn in some twisted game, was nearly impossible to accept. Mason continued, unfazed by Elon's growing disbelief. "It's not just about the cars or the rockets, it's about control. We've traced these operations back to a few key players, a global organization that's been covertly pulling strings for decades. And they've been using your work to advance their agenda." The room seemed to shrink, the weight of the words pressing down on Elon. "What kind of control?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Mason leaned back in his chair, the faintest trace of concern in his eyes. "They've been developing mind-altering technologies, leveraging your neural interface designs, the potential to control human thought, to steer entire populations in ways we've never seen. And all of this is tied directly to you, your work." Elon recoiled slightly, unable to digest the full magnitude of what Mason was suggesting. He had built his reputation on breaking barriers and pushing technology to new heights. But the idea that his inventions could be used to manipulate human minds, it was beyond his wildest fears. "They're using my tech to control people?" Elon finally managed, his voice edged with frustration. "I didn't sign up for this. I thought we were making the future better, not taking away people's free will." Mason's gaze softened slightly. "I know. And that's why we need you, Elon. The people behind this operation are too powerful for us to take down alone. But if you help us, if you pull your resources and your influence, we might have a chance to expose them, to stop them before they get any further." Elon sat back in his chair, his mind spinning. This wasn't what he had imagined when he started his ventures into electric cars and space exploration. He had envisioned humanity advancing, breaking free from the constraints of Earth, using technology for the greater good. But now here he was, faced with a truth that threatened everything he stood for. His entire career had been based on trust, the trust of his team, his investors, and the public. And now, that trust was crumbling beneath him. How could he have missed this? How could he have been so blind to the possibility that something darker was at play? He looked up at Mason, his resolve hardening. "All right," Elon said, his voice steady. "Tell me what I need to do. We can't let this go on any longer." Mason nodded, his expression one of grim determination. "We have to go underground, Elon. We'll need to move quickly. The people behind this are watching, and they'll do whatever it takes to protect their secrets." Elon felt a cold rush of fear, but it was quickly replaced by something else, an overwhelming sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he was facing a challenge unlike any he had encountered before. And this time it wasn't just about innovation, it was about survival. Elon had never imagined that his greatest challenge wouldn't be in outer space or on Mars, but right here, on Earth. As he sat across from Agent Mason, the weight of the revelation settled on his shoulders like a lead blanket. The world he had worked so hard to build, a world of innovation, progress, and exploration, was now at risk of being twisted into something completely unrecognizable. Mason's words echoed in his mind. "You've been used." The technology Elon had pioneered, the ideas that had come from his very soul, had been hijacked by an unseen hand, one that sought to control, not empower. It was a betrayal that cut deeper than anything he had ever experienced. How could this happen? Elon muttered, more to himself than to Mason. His fingers drummed nervously on the table, his mind trying to grasp the enormity of it all. Mason sat still, his eyes never leaving Elon's face. "This isn't just about you, Musk. You're a part of something much bigger, a web of influence hidden in plain sight. You've been building the future, but they've been building control." Elon took a deep breath, trying to process the magnitude of what Mason was saying. Control? Was it really possible that his work could be used to manipulate the future of humanity, to bend minds to the will of a few powerful people? It seemed like the kind of dystopian nightmare that one would read about in science fiction novels, not something that could actually be happening in real life. But the documents Mason had shown him, the cold, calculated data, made it all feel too real. "We need to move fast," Mason continued, his voice steady, but with an undertone of urgency. "These people won't stop. They're already moving forward with their plans, and if we don't act now, we'll never be able to stop them." Elon nodded, feeling the pressure of time closing in. "So what do you need from me?" "First," Mason said, leaning forward, "we need to get access to the research facilities. We need to see what's been done with the technology you've developed. Once we have that, we can figure out how to stop them." Elon frowned. "You're talking about breaking into one of my own facilities. I don't like the sound of that." Mason's eyes narrowed. "I know it's a lot to ask, but we don't have a choice. We've been monitoring their movements for months and the clock is ticking. If we don't act now, the damage will be irreversible." Elon's mind raced. The thought of betraying his own work, of exposing the very projects he had spent years building, filled him with a deep sense of dread. But Mason was right. Time was running out, and if there was any chance of stopping this from spiraling out of control, he had no other option. "All right," Elon said, his voice heavy with resolve. "Let's do it." As they made their plans, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was at play, something far more sinister than just a rogue group of tech moguls looking to exploit his work. The organization Mason had spoken of wasn't just a few people operating in the shadows. It was a global network, one that had infiltrated the highest echelons of power and influence, and had been doing so for decades. Elon had always prided himself on being a disruptor, but this was a different kind of disruption, one that threatened to tear apart everything he had worked for, everything humanity had worked for. "Where do we start?" Elon asked, his gaze fixed on Mason, determination now replacing his initial shock. "We start with the data," Mason replied. "We need to figure out what they've done with the neural interface technology. The rest will follow from there." As they made their way out of the room and toward the underground facility where the research was being kept, Elon couldn't help but feel the weight of the world on his shoulders. This wasn't just about one man or one company. It was about the future of technology and its impact on humanity. And now it was up to him to make sure that future wasn't hijacked by those who sought to use it for their own gain. The drive to the underground facility was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy with the weight of unspoken words. Elon sat in the back of a black SUV, his mind still reeling from the conversation with Agent Mason. Every question that had been building in his mind only seemed to grow louder. What did they do with my work? How deep does this go? His usual confidence had been replaced by a gnawing unease. He had always prided himself on being ahead of the curve, on understanding the potential of every project he undertook. But now he realized he had been blind to the forces at play behind the scenes, forces that had used his innovations for purposes he could never have imagined. Agent Mason sat beside him, his expression unreadable. The tension in the car was palpable, neither of them willing to speak, as though saying the wrong thing might somehow set off a chain of events neither was ready to face. The drive took them through winding roads, out of the city and into a remote area. The further they went, the more the landscape seemed to stretch into emptiness, an expanse of nothingness that made Elon feel small, isolated. It was as if the world outside didn't exist, and they were heading toward a place where reality itself could be bent, manipulated, controlled. Finally, the vehicle slowed to a stop in front of a nondescript building, its exterior stark and unwelcoming. The building blended into the barren landscape, almost as if it were invisible, a part of the earth itself. Elon could feel the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. There was something about the place, something off. "This is it," Mason said. Breaking the silence, he opened the door and stepped out, his movements deliberate and purposeful. Elon followed, his heart pounding in his chest as they approached a hidden entryway on the side of the building. They entered through a steel door that creaked as it opened, revealing a long, dimly lit hallway. The air inside felt stale, and the sound of their footsteps echoed off the cold concrete walls. "Stay close," Mason muttered, his voice low. "We don't know who else might be here." Elon nodded, his senses on high alert. The deeper they went into the facility, the more he began to feel like a man walking into a spider's web. Every step was one closer to the center, and he wasn't sure if he was the prey or the predator. They reached a large metal door at the end of the hallway. Mason slid a keycard into a reader, and with a soft beep, the door unlocked. Inside was a room unlike anything Elon had ever seen, a high-tech command center filled with screens displaying rows of data, blueprints, and monitoring systems. The sheer scale of the operation was overwhelming. "This is where the research has been happening," Mason said, his voice almost reverential. "And this is where it all started." Elon's eyes darted across the room, his mind trying to process the enormity of what was before him. There were files upon files of research, and in the center of the room, a large table filled with holographic projections of neural interfaces and biotech enhancements. It looked like something straight out of a science fiction movie, but it was real. One particular hologram caught his attention. It was a neural link system, similar to what he had been working on with his team at Neuralink. But there was something different about this one. It looked invasive, dark. "This system," Mason said, noticing Elon's focus, "is what they've been working on. It's far beyond anything you or your team have created. This isn't about improving human ability, it's about controlling it." Elon's throat went dry. "How could this be? I never—" Mason interrupted him, his tone sharp. "This wasn't just about neural enhancements. This system was designed to hijack the human mind. It's a prototype for something much larger, something that could give them the ability to control entire populations, to influence thoughts, decisions, and actions, without anyone realizing it." Elon stepped closer to the hologram, his mind reeling. He recognized some of the components, the neural interfaces, the patterns of the algorithms, but they had been distorted, twisted into something unrecognizable and dark. His stomach churned as he realized the true scope of what had been done. The technology he had envisioned to enhance human capability, to connect minds and machines for the betterment of society, had been turned into a tool for totalitarian control. "This is beyond anything I ever imagined," Elon whispered, more to himself than to Mason. "I thought I was helping the world, not enabling its destruction." Mason didn't flinch. "The reality is they've been using your innovations for years, Musk. What you've created has been instrumental in their plans, but it's not too late. We can stop them, if we act quickly." Elon stood frozen, his mind filled with 1,000 questions. Was it too late? Had the damage already been done? And if so, was there any way to stop it? As he processed what he had learned, the door to the room suddenly slammed open, and a group of men in black tactical gear stormed inside. Elon's heart skipped a beat as the situation took a dangerous turn. "We have to go," Mason snapped, grabbing Elon by the arm. "Now!" The agents moved quickly, and Elon felt a rush of adrenaline flood his system. He had spent his career preparing for the impossible, beating the odds, breaking boundaries. But this was different. This wasn't just about technology or innovation. It was about something far more dangerous, something that could alter the course of human history. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the narrow corridor as the tactical team rushed into the room. Their black uniforms were almost a blur as they moved with military precision, securing the entrance and scanning every corner. Elon's heart raced as he followed Mason, who had already grabbed his arm and was pulling him toward the back exit. The situation had escalated far quicker than either of them had anticipated. What was meant to be a covert operation to uncover the dark forces manipulating his work had now turned into a desperate escape. And as Elon tried to make sense of everything that had happened, the only thing that kept him grounded was the single overriding truth: time was running out. "We need to move faster," Mason hissed, pushing through a metal door that led to a service tunnel beneath the facility. The air was cold, dank, and filled with the scent of rust and oil. The narrow passage offered little in the way of comfort, but at this moment, it was their only chance. Elon felt the tension in his body tighten, every nerve on high alert. The sound of pursuing agents grew louder behind them, and he knew they didn't have much time before the facility would be on lockdown. There was no telling how many more agents were inside, how far the conspiracy reached, or how far they'd go to keep their secrets safe. Mason glanced over his shoulder, his face set in a grim expression. They're not going to let us walk out. So I'll hear, Musk. If they catch us, if they get their hands on that research, they'll finish what they started, and we'll never be able to stop it. Elon nodded, but his mind was racing in a dozen different directions. He had spent his entire career building systems that could change the world for the better. The idea that those very systems were now being twisted into weapons of control was something he could barely comprehend. It felt like a betrayal of everything he had worked for. Where are we going? Elon asked, his breath coming faster as they ran through the dark tunnel. We need to get to the extraction point, Mason replied. It's about a mile from here. There's a safe house set up, but we have to be quick. The cold, narrow tunnel felt like a passage into another world. Every step they took seemed to bring them closer to the truth, but also further from the life Elon had known. There was no going back after this, no way to undo what had already been done. His work had been stolen, manipulated, and turned against humanity. And now he had to decide if he was willing to fight for everything he had built. Keep moving, Mason ordered, pulling him back from his thoughts. We can't afford to slow down. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the tunnel, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps pounding down the passage behind them. Elon's heart skipped a beat. The agents were gaining on them. They had to make it to the safe house or they'd be caught, and with them the knowledge of what had been done to his technology. Another blast rang out, this time closer, too close. Mason reached into his jacket, pulling out a small device, and quickly pressing a button. They've triggered the lockdown. We're going to have to get creative to get out of here. Before Elon could ask what that meant, Mason led him down a side passage, toward a service elevator that had been concealed behind a rusted panel. With a swift motion, Mason pried it open, revealing a small, dimly lit lift. Get in, Mason instructed, pushing Elon toward the elevator. It's our only way up. Elon stepped inside, still trying to grasp the full scale of what was happening. Every fiber of his being screamed that this wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a fight for control over the future. The technology he had invented was now a ticking time bomb, and he had no idea how much damage had already been done. As the elevator doors slammed shut, Elon felt a chill run down his spine. They were moments away from being discovered, and even with this narrow escape route, he knew they were still in grave danger. There were people in power, powerful, shadowy figures, who would stop at nothing to protect their secret. And now they were coming for him. The elevator whined as it began its ascent, the slow hum of the machinery the only sound in the tense silence. Elon glanced over at Mason, who was staring ahead, his expression unreadable. Do you think we can stop them? Elon asked, his voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. Can we fix this? Can we expose what they've done before it's too late? Mason didn't answer right away, his fingers gripping the edge of the elevator as if trying to hold on to some sense of control in the face of overwhelming odds. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke. It's not going to be easy, Mason said, but we have no choice. If we don't stop them now, if we don't take back what they've stolen from us, it could be the end of everything we've worked for. Elon nodded, his resolve hardening. This wasn't just about saving his career or his company anymore. This was about saving humanity from an unimaginable future where technology was used to control, not empower. And if it meant risking everything, he had, his life, his reputation, his future, then so be it. The elevator reached the top floor with a jolt, and the doors slid open to reveal the night sky. The world outside seemed so far away, as if the chaos inside the building was another world altogether. But Elon knew better. The storm had only just begun. The night air was crisp as the elevator doors opened, revealing a small rooftop access point. Elon stepped out first, squinting as he adjusted to the dim light. The city stretched out before him, its skyline twinkling with thousands of lights, but it all felt distant now. The familiar world, the one where he had made his name and built his empire, now seemed a far-off memory. Mason emerged from the elevator behind him, scanning the area. "Stay low," he muttered, pulling Elon toward a corner of the rooftop. "We've got eyes everywhere. The moment we step out of here, we're targets." Elon nodded, trying to shake off the feeling of paranoia creeping in. He had always been able to outsmart competitors, navigate corporate rivalries, and lead SpaceX and Tesla to unimaginable heights. But this was something far different, something he hadn't been prepared for. He had never imagined that the real battle for humanity's future would come from forces working in the shadows, people who saw the future as something to control rather than to create. Mason handed him a small earpiece. "We have a couple of minutes before they lock down the rooftop. The extraction team is en route, but we'll need to move quickly." Elon adjusted the earpiece in his ear, trying to steady his breathing. He could hear the distant hum of helicopter blades, a signal that the extraction was indeed imminent. But even as he prepared to leave, the questions kept swirling in his mind. What was really going on? The research they had uncovered, the neural control system. It wasn't just about taking over his technology. It was about something bigger, something far more dangerous. Mason saw the expression on Elon's face. "You're thinking too much, Musk. Don't overthink it. We get you out and then we figure out how to expose everything." "But how do we even begin to expose something like this?" Elon asked. His voice was hoarse, a mix of exhaustion and frustration. "These people are everywhere, deep inside governments, corporations, military. We're talking about a network that's been in place for decades, maybe longer. How do you take something like that down?" Mason gave him a hard look, his eyes steely. "With resolve. We start by breaking it wide open. We leak the research, the evidence we have, and let the world see it. If we get this out into the right hands, people who can push it to the top, we might just stand a chance." Elon stared at him. "The right hands? What do you mean?" Mason paused, considering his words carefully. "There are still good people in the system, Musk. People who are fighting to stop this. We just have to get the truth to them. The media, the right politicians, whistleblowers. The moment the public sees what's happening, the clock will start ticking for those pulling the strings." Elon's mind raced as Mason spoke. A global conspiracy, one that used his work for manipulation and control, was now exposed. The very foundation of technology, the heart of innovation, was being corrupted. And the people who were behind it were powerful, ruthless. Could exposing the truth really make a difference? Would anyone listen, or would they just shut it down before it had a chance to spread? Before he could respond, a voice crackled in his earpiece. "This is the extraction team. We've got 60 seconds. Get to the roof edge now." Mason turned to Elon. "Time's up. Let's go." They moved swiftly, keeping low as they made their way across the rooftop to the edge. The city stretched out beneath them, the lights of the streets and buildings offering no comfort in the face of the chaos they were about to enter. Elon couldn't help but feel a sense of finality as they reached the edge of the building. They had come this far, but it felt like the hardest part was still ahead. The truth had been exposed, but the world wasn't ready for it. There was no going back from this. As Mason pulled out a set of ropes and fastened them to a secure anchor point, Elon felt his pulse quicken. He had always been able to overcome adversity, but now it wasn't just about surviving. It was about saving the future of humanity, and the consequences of failure were unthinkable. "Hold on tight," Mason said, attaching a harness to Elon. "We're about to make a quick descent. The extraction vehicle is waiting at the bottom." Before Elon could respond, the rope tightened, and they began to rappel down the side of the building. The cold wind whipped past him as they descended, and for a moment he felt a strange sense of liberation, almost as if the world were shrinking, and the only thing that mattered was getting away from the danger, from the lies. But even as he focused on his descent, his mind was still on the bigger picture. The technology that had once been a dream was now the key to either saving or destroying everything. How could they expose the truth before it was too late? When they finally reached the ground, the waiting vehicle was already in position. A sleek, black SUV with tinted windows, the kind that would blend seamlessly into any high-stakes operation. Mason ushered Elon into the back of the vehicle. The moment the door slammed shut, the vehicle sped off, taking them away from the facility and into the night. Elon leaned back in his seat, his thoughts swirling. The future of humanity was at stake, and for the first time, he felt like he was fighting against something far bigger than any company or corporation. This was no longer just about business. It was about the very survival of free will. As they drove, Mason spoke again. "This is bigger than we thought, Musk. But we're not alone in this. We have allies, people who are already working to expose what's going on. It's just a matter of getting the right evidence to the right people before they shut it all down." Elon nodded, his eyes fixed on the dark road ahead. "Then let's make sure they don't shut it down." As the vehicle sped toward an uncertain future, one thing was clear. The battle for the future of humanity was just beginning. The hours after their escape were a blur of fast-moving vehicles, darkened alleyways, and hushed conversations. Elon could hardly focus, his mind overwhelmed by the sheer scope of what he had just learned. His life's work, the technology he had dreamed of using to unlock human potential, had been hijacked by those who sought to use it for manipulation and control. As if that wasn't enough, his every step now seemed watched, every move anticipated by those who had orchestrated this global conspiracy. In the back seat of the SUV, the interior lights dimmed, casting long shadows across Elon's face. Mason sat beside him, typing away furiously on a secure laptop. The road ahead was winding, leading them out of the city and into the isolated outskirts. "We're heading to a safe house," Mason said, glancing up at Elon. His tone was calm, but there was a sharp edge to his voice. "This place is hidden. It's been used for years by people in our circle. No one knows about it except for a few trusted individuals. Once we get there, we can regroup, strategize, and figure out our next steps." Elon nodded, trying to absorb everything Mason had said. His mind was a mess of swirling questions, doubts, and fears. Who could he trust now? Who were these trusted individuals Mason spoke of? As they continued their drive, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that everything around him was part of some larger design. The more he thought about it, the more certain he became that the world he had known was built on a fragile illusion. This safe house was just another piece of the puzzle, but what would he find when they got there? Mason closed his laptop and turned to face Elon. "The truth is, the network we're up against is bigger than you realize. These people, these shadow figures, they've been in control for a long time. They operate through layers of power: government, military, corporations. They're embedded everywhere. But there's one thing they didn't account for." Elon raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued. "And what's that?" "They underestimated you," Mason replied. His voice had a note of respect now, something Elon hadn't expected. "They thought you were just a tech genius, a businessman with a vision for the future. But what they didn't know was that you're one of the few people capable of seeing through their facade. You're the key to exposing them. That's why they've been trying to erase you." Elon didn't know how to respond. The idea that he was the key to something larger felt both flattering and terrifying. He had spent his career building revolutionary companies, creating new frontiers in space, energy, and transportation. But this felt like a battle of a different kind. A war where the stakes were far higher than profit margins or technological advancement. "We need to go public," Mason continued, breaking Elon's train of thought. "But it's not enough just to release the data we have. If we're going to take them down, we have to get the world involved. We need to expose the network piece by piece. We need to turn the spotlight on them." Elon shifted in his seat, his gaze focused on the passing landscape. Expose the network. The idea felt massive, but it also felt like the only way forward. He couldn't go back to the way things were. This fight wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of us. "And how do we do that?" Elon asked, his voice steady. "How do we break something so intricate, so vast?" Mason smiled grimly. "We go straight for the heart of the operation. We go after their financial systems, their supply chains, the secret contracts, the politicians they've bought off. We start small, infiltrate the system, and expose everything they've hidden from the public eye. If we can make it undeniable, If we can get the right evidence into the right hands, we can start a movement that even they won't be able to stop. A movement. The word stuck in Elon's mind. It was both a promise and a threat. If they could shine the light on the system, on the people pulling the strings, maybe they could change the game. But at what cost? And what would happen when those in control realized that the truth was no longer theirs to keep? The SUV slowed as it approached a nondescript building tucked away on a quiet street. It looked like just another abandoned structure, a place forgotten by time. But Elon had learned to trust nothing about appearances anymore. Mason turned to him. "We're here. Stick close and follow my lead." They exited the vehicle and entered the building through a narrow alley, avoiding the streetlights. The door was hidden behind a stack of old crates, and Mason swiped a card to unlock it. The door opened silently, revealing a darkened hallway. Inside, the safe house was anything but what Elon had imagined. It was a fully equipped command center, with monitors flashing with data, schematics of global infrastructure, maps pinpointing key locations across the world. The hum of the machines was almost soothing, a strange contrast to the chaos they had just escaped. "Welcome to the heart of the resistance," Mason said, turning to Elon with a flicker of pride in his eyes. "This is where the real work happens. We're not alone in this fight. There are others, and we're all working toward the same goal, bringing the truth to light." Elon looked around, taking it all in. For the first time since all this started, he felt like there might be a way forward. He wasn't just running anymore. He was part of something bigger, something that could change the course of history. But with that realization came the weight of the responsibility he now carried. "What's the first move?" Elon asked, determined to take action. Mason's eyes narrowed, his face hardening with resolve. "We start by gathering the people who can help us. The whistleblowers, the insiders, the ones who have the knowledge and the courage to speak out. Once we have them, we launch our campaign. We expose them. And when the world sees what they've done, we take back control." The next step was clear. It wasn't just about escaping the shadows. It was about stepping into the light and using everything they had to bring down a global conspiracy that threatened the very core of freedom and human autonomy. As Elon looked around the room, he realized that this was the moment, the beginning of a new chapter, one that would define the rest of his life. It was no longer about launching rockets or building cars. It was about something far more important. It was about fighting for the future. The command center was alive, with activity, and Elon could sense the urgency in the air. People rushed from station to station, tapping away at keyboards, communicating over headsets, and scrutinizing live feeds that seemed to cover every inch of the globe. Mason led Elon into a back room where a table was covered in maps, documents, and digital devices, flashing with new data. "All right, Musk. This is where things get real," Mason said, slamming a folder down onto the table. "What we're up against is a network so deeply embedded in the world's systems, it's going to take everything we have to bring it down." Elon looked at the documents, his mind still racing to keep up. There were names, dozens of them crossed out, others highlighted in red. There were connections between companies, governments, and military operations that made his stomach turn. The conspiracy was not just about the hijacking of his technology, it was about controlling everything. They had their fingers in every pie: energy, transportation, defense, media. The scope of it was beyond anything he could have imagined. He felt the weight of the situation, like a physical pressure on his chest. Every move mattered now. Every choice he made could tip the balance. They weren't just up against corrupt corporations or rogue governments. They were up against a hidden enemy that had orchestrated a global conspiracy for decades. "We've identified the core players," Mason continued, pointing to a diagram on the wall. "This is the circle of power, the ones pulling the strings behind all the chaos. Some of these names you might recognize: corporate CEOs, former politicians, military leaders. But there are others, deeper in the shadows, whose names will never make it to the public eye." Elon leaned in, studying the map closely. He recognized a few of the names: high-ranking executives in global companies, people whose influence had shaped entire industries. But then there were others, anonymously labeled as the architects. These were the figures who had been operating in the background, manipulating the system, creating the conditions for their ultimate control. Mason noticed Elon's focus and nodded. These architects are the real danger. They're the ones who pulled you into this in the first place. They saw your technology, your vision for the future, and they wanted to harness it for their own agenda. Elon's mind spun. He'd always known that powerful people wanted to control emerging technologies, but this was different. They weren't just trying to monopolize the market. They were trying to control human thought itself. The neural control systems they had been working on were just the beginning. If they succeeded, the entire world could be manipulated at the push of a button. People's thoughts, desires, even their very actions could be directed from a central source. "We need to infiltrate their communications," Mason said, pulling Elon back to the present. "This network is built on secrecy, but the cracks are starting to show. We've got insiders, people who are fed up with what's been happening. If we can get the right people to talk, we can expose everything." Elon nodded, his mind made up. But how do we get them to talk? How do we convince these people to risk everything when they've already been part of this? Mason hesitated, his face darkening. That's the hard part. Some of them are deep into this, and they're not going to let go without a fight. We've got a few leads, but it's going to take time. And time, well, we don't have a lot of it. As Mason turned to start organizing the next steps, Elon felt a surge of determination. They were right about one thing. They had underestimated him. This wasn't just about stopping some faceless enemy. It was about saving the future of the world. He couldn't back down now, no matter how dangerous it became. "Let's start," Elon said, his voice steady. "Let's go after them, one by one." The following days were a blur of clandestine operations and secret meetings. Elon and Mason worked tirelessly, using every resource at their disposal to track down the key players within the architect's network. They gathered intel, reached out to former insiders, and analyzed every scrap of information they could find. It was a game of cat and mouse, and they were playing on a global scale. One morning they received a tip. A whistleblower, an anonymous source, had contacted their team with information about a high-profile meeting between the architects, scheduled to take place in a few days. It was a rare opportunity, an opening that could potentially expose the entire network. "This is it," Mason said, his voice tight with excitement. "We get in there, we get the evidence, and we hit them where it hurts." Elon looked at the intel, his heart pounding in his chest. This was the moment they had been waiting for. Everything they had worked for, every sacrifice, had led them here. If they succeeded, it could change everything. If they failed, well, there would be no coming back from it. "We go in fast," Elon said, eyes steely with determination, "and we make sure we get out no matter what." The plan was risky, too risky even, but they had no other choice. The world needed to know the truth. The architects of this conspiracy had to be exposed. As the days passed, tension built to a fever pitch. Elon couldn't sleep, his mind racing with all the possible outcomes. He had lived through so many impossible situations in his life, but this felt different. This wasn't just about launching a product or completing a mission. It was about taking down a machine that had been running for decades, a machine that used technology to enslave rather than liberate. The night of the meeting came. Elon, Mason, and their small team made their way to the location, a nondescript conference center nestled in the mountains, far away from prying eyes. They had a plan, a carefully crafted set of moves that would allow them to infiltrate the meeting, gather the evidence, and escape before the architects had a chance to react. But as they approached the building, Elon's gut twisted with the unmistakable feeling of being watched. He couldn't shake the sense that the enemy knew they were coming. Had they been betrayed? He turned to Mason, his voice low. "Are we sure about this? What if they're waiting for us?" Mason's face was grim. "We go anyway, we don't have a choice." And with that they moved into the darkness, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The mountains loomed ahead, casting long shadows in the fading light as Elon, Mason, and their small team approached the conference center. The place was eerily quiet, too quiet. There was a sense of foreboding in the air, an unease that gnawed at Elon's insides. His mind raced as he recalled every piece of information they had gathered. This meeting was supposed to be their opportunity to take down the architects, the shadowy cabal that had controlled the global systems of power for far too long. But now, with every step they took, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. As they neared the entrance, Mason gave a subtle nod. They were close. The plan had been clear. Infiltrate the meeting, gather the evidence they needed, and extract it all without being detected. But Elon knew the stakes were higher than just the information they would obtain. This was a fight for the future, a fight that, if lost, would cost them everything. Mason whispered, "We go in through the back. Stay low, stay quiet, no distractions." Elon nodded, the weight of the situation settling heavily on his shoulders. This wasn't just about him anymore. This wasn't just about technology. This was about protecting the future of humanity from an elite group that had been manipulating the very systems that governed everyone's lives. As they approached the rear of the conference center, the sounds of muffled voices reached them, voices that sounded so distant, yet so powerful. Elon's breath caught in his chest. They were close now. The room beyond the door was where the Haku architects would be meeting, where the final plans for control would be forged. Elon's heart pounded in his ears as they made their way through the building's darkened hallways. He could feel the tension building in the pit of his stomach. Every footstep, every creak of the floorboards felt like it echoed through the silence. They were so close now, closer than they had ever been to unmasking the people who had tried to destroy everything he believed in. The meeting was about to start, and then as they rounded the corner, a flash of movement caught Elon's eye. He froze. A tall figure appeared in the dim light of the hallway, a man in a suit, his face partially obscured by shadows. Elon's heart skipped a beat. It was one of them, the architects. How had they known they were coming? Before Elon could react, the man stepped forward, his expression unreadable. His voice was calm but laced with a quiet menace. "You've come all this way, Elon, but you're too late." Mason immediately tensed, his hand moving to the concealed weapon at his side, but the man held up a hand, signaling for calm. "There's no need for that," he said. "I'm not here to stop you, I'm here to make you an offer." Elon narrowed his eyes. "An offer? From you?" The man smiled coldly, a knowing look in his eyes. "You see, Elon, you've been a part of something much bigger than you realize. You're not just a tech genius. You're a symbol, a catalyst for change. But you've always been playing checkers while we've been playing chess." Elon's mind raced. "What do you mean?" The man's smile widened. "We've been watching you for years. You've been on the right track with your innovations, but you've always been too focused on the future. You never stopped to think about the present. The world doesn't need innovation, Elon. It needs control." Elon felt a chill run down his spine. This was it, the final test. He had been prepared for the betrayal, but not like this. Not this calmly orchestrated manipulation. "Control?" Elon repeated. "What are you talking about?" The man's eyes gleamed. "We've been using your ideas all along, Musk. The Neuralink, the AI, the space projects. They were never just about the future of humanity. They were about controlling it. People need leaders, Elon. They need direction, and we, the architects, have provided that direction." Elon recoiled, the weight of his naivety hitting him like a ton of bricks. Everything he had worked for, his companies, his goals, his visions, had been twisted, hijacked for a purpose he never saw coming. Mason spoke up, his voice low and threatening. "So you're saying you manipulated everything? That you used Elon to further your control over the world?" The man's eyes flicked to Mason, a faint flicker of amusement in his gaze. "Manipulation? No, I prefer the term guidance. People don't understand what they need, Elon, but you saw the potential. You were a pawn in our game, but now you can be a king. Help us, and we'll ensure your legacy. Help us shape the future. You'll be in control of it all." Elon stood there, frozen, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Could he trust this man? Could he trust anyone anymore? The truth about the architects, the ones who had manipulated the course of human history, was now clear. The stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. The world was not just at risk of being left behind by progress. It was at risk of being completely reshaped by a handful of people who saw humanity as nothing more than a resource to be controlled, and then, like a sudden thunderclap, everything clicked into place. The realization hit Elon with the force of a revelation. He would not be part of this system, no matter how powerful they were, no matter how tempting the offer was. What was at stake wasn't just his legacy, it was the future of humanity. "You're wrong," Elon said, his voice steady but filled with a deep conviction. "The future doesn't belong to you or anyone else, it belongs to everyone." The man's smile faltered for just a moment, and that was all Elon needed. With a sudden movement, Mason grabbed the man's wrist, forcing him into a chair. It all happened so fast. The team, who had been waiting just out of sight, stormed into the room, securing the perimeter and disabling the cameras. "We're done here," Mason said coldly as he turned to Elon. "Let's go." Elon turned to the man, who was now struggling in his seat. "You thought you had us all figured out, didn't you?" Elon said, his voice rising in defiance. "But the future isn't just about control, it's about freedom, it's about choice, and no one, not you, not anyone, can take that away from us." They had done it. They had gathered the evidence, and now it was time to expose it to the world. The architects' network was crumbling, their secrets laid bare for all to see. And the truth would finally set humanity on a path toward a future built on transparency, freedom, and opportunity for all. Elon walked out of the room with Mason by his side, the weight of everything they had fought for settling in his chest. They had won, but the journey wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. The truth is out. The battle is far from over. What's the first step you would take in changing the world for the better?